The morning of Queen Elizabeth II's funeral dawned grey and solemn across London, matching the mood that had settled over the entire United Kingdom. For 10 days, the nation had mourned the loss of their longest reigning monarch, and now, on this September morning in 2022, millions would gather to bid their final farewell to the woman who had been a constant presence in their lives for over 70 years. Inside Clarence House, the atmosphere was thick with tension and unspoken emotions. Prince William stood before his bedroom mirror, adjusting his military uniform for what felt like the 100th time. His hands trembled slightly as he fastened the ceremonial sword at his side. This wasn't just any funeral he was preparing for. This was his grandmother's funeral, the woman who had been his rock, his guide, and his inspiration throughout his entire life. The weight of the moment pressed down on his shoulders like a physical burden. In a few hours, he would walk behind his grandmother's coffin, watched by billions of people around the world. The thought made his stomach churn with a mixture of grief and anxiety. He had attended many state functions and ceremonies, but nothing had ever felt as monumentous as this. Catherine, his wife, moved quietly around their bedroom, making final preparations for their children. Prince George, now 9 years old, would be attending the funeral alongside his parents, a decision that had been carefully considered and discussed at length within the family. Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis were deemed too young for such a solemn and lengthy ceremony, but George, as second in line to the throne, needed to understand the gravity of the moment and the responsibilities that would one day be his. William watched Catherine through the mirror as she helped George with his dark suit. Their son's face was unusually serious, and William could see traces of confusion and sadness in the boy's eyes. How do you explain death to a child when that death represents the end of an era? How do you help them understand that the great-grandmother they loved would no longer be there for birthday parties, Christmas gatherings, or quiet moments of wisdom and warmth? The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside their room drew William's attention. He knew those footsteps well. They belonged to his father, now King Charles III, who had been thrust into the role of monarch at the age of 73. The transition had been swift and overwhelming, and William had watched his father struggle with the immense responsibilities that had suddenly fallen upon his shoulders. A soft knock came at the door, and Charles entered, his own uniform perfectly pressed, his expression grave but composed. Father and son looked at each other for a long moment, understanding passing between them without words. They were both grieving, both struggling with the reality of their new circumstances, and both acutely aware that today would mark a turning point in their lives and in the monarchy itself. "The cars will be ready in 20 minutes, Charles said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of exhaustion that had become his constant companion over the past 10 days. "How are you holding up, William?" William straightened his shoulders, drawing on the composure that had been drilled into him since childhood. "I'm managing, Father. We all are." He paused, glancing toward Catherine and George. "It's going to be a difficult day." Charles nodded, his eyes reflecting the same mixture of grief and determination that William felt. "Your grandmother would be proud of how you've handled everything these past few days. She always knew you had the strength to carry on her legacy." The mention of his grandmother's pride brought a fresh wave of emotion to William's chest. Elizabeth II had been more than just his monarch and grandmother. She had been his mentor, his confidant, and his example of what true leadership looked like. Her death had left a void in his life that he wasn't sure could ever be filled. As they prepared to leave for Westminster Abbey, William's mind wandered to the countless memories he shared with his grandmother. He remembered childhood visits to Balmoral, where she would take him on long walks through the Scottish countryside, teaching him about duty, service, and the responsibilities that came with their position. He recalled her gentle guidance during his teenage years, when the weight of his future role had seemed overwhelming and the scrutiny of the media had felt unbearable. The Queen had always possessed an uncanny ability to say exactly what he needed to hear when he needed to hear it. During his military service in the RAF, she had been his strongest supporter, understanding his desire to serve his country in a meaningful way before fully embracing his royal duties. When he had struggled with the decision to propose to Catherine, worried about bringing someone he loved into the intense scrutiny of royal life, his grandmother had been the one to remind him that love and duty could coexist, that happiness was not something he needed to sacrifice for his role. Now, as he prepared to say goodbye to her forever, William found himself thinking about all the conversations they would never have, all the advice he would never receive, and all the moments they would never share. The thought was almost unbearable. The journey to Westminster Abbey passed in a blur of crowds, cameras, and ceremonial precision. William sat in the car with Catherine and George, watching the thousands of people who had lined the streets to pay their respects. Many were crying openly, holding flowers, flags, and photographs of the Queen. The outpouring of grief and love from the public was both comforting and overwhelming. George sat quietly between his parents, his small hands clasped tightly in his lap. William could see his son trying to process everything he was witnessing: the massive crowds, the solemn atmosphere, and the weight of history unfolding around them. At 9 years old, George was being exposed to the full gravity of their family's role in British society, and William hoped his son was ready for what that meant. Westminster Abbey loomed before them as their car approached, its ancient stones having witnessed centuries of royal ceremonies, coronations, and farewells. Today, it would host the funeral of Britain's longest-serving monarch, and William knew that every detail of the ceremony had been planned with meticulous precision by his grandmother herself, years before her death. As they entered the Abbey, William was struck by the sight of the congregation. World leaders, foreign royalty, diplomats, and representatives from every corner of the Commonwealth had gathered to honor his grandmother's life and legacy. The scale of the ceremony was breathtaking, but it was also deeply personal. This was his family saying goodbye to the woman who had been their anchor for so many decades. The Queen's coffin, draped in the royal standard and topped with the imperial state crown, sat at the front of the Abbey, surrounded by the pomp and ceremony that had defined her reign. William's breath caught in his throat as he looked at it, the reality of her death hitting him anew. Inside that coffin lay the woman who had taught him everything he knew about leadership, service, and sacrifice. As the family took their places in the front pews, William found himself scanning the faces of those around him. His father, bearing the weight of his new role with stoic dignity. His stepmother Camilla, who had faced years of public scrutiny but had finally found acceptance within the family and the nation. His brother Harry, who had flown in from California with his wife Meghan, their relationship with the family still strained but set aside for this moment of mourning. The sight of Harry brought a complex mix of emotions to William's chest. The brothers had once been inseparable, united in their grief after their mother's death, and their shared understanding of the unique pressures of royal life. But, in recent years, their relationship had become complicated, marked by public disagreements, tell-all interviews, and a painful distance that seemed to grow wider with each passing month. Today, however, those differences felt insignificant in the face of their shared loss. They were both grandsons of the woman lying in that coffin, both shaped by her love and guidance, both struggling to honor her memory while navigating their own paths forward. William hoped that perhaps this moment of grief might begin to heal the rift between them, though he knew it would take much more than a funeral to truly repair their relationship. As the ceremony began, the haunting sounds of hymns and prayers filled the ancient abbey. William found himself transported back to countless other services he had attended in this same space: his wedding to Catherine, other family funerals, and state occasions where his grandmother had presided with grace and dignity. Each memory seemed to layer upon the next, creating a tapestry of moments that had defined his life and his understanding of what it meant to serve. The Archbishop of Canterbury's voice echoed through the abbey as he spoke about the Queen's life of service, her unwavering faith, and her dedication to her people. William listened to the words, but his mind kept drifting to more personal memories, quiet moments with his grandmother that the public had never seen and never would. He remembered the afternoon, just a few months before her death, when he had visited her at Windsor Castle. She had seemed frail but still sharp, still interested in everything happening in his life and in the country. They had talked about his children, about his work with mental health awareness, and about the future of the monarchy. She had expressed her confidence in him, her belief that he would be ready when his time came to serve as king. "The crown is not a burden, William," she had told him that day, her eyes still bright with the wisdom of her years. "It is a privilege and an opportunity to make a difference in people's lives. Remember that, and you will never go wrong." Those words echoed in his mind now as he sat in the abbey, surrounded by the elaborate ceremony and the weight of history. His grandmother had spent 7 decades proving the truth of her words, using her position to provide stability, continuity, and hope to her people through times of great change and challenge. As the service continued, William became increasingly aware of the cameras focused on him and his family. He knew that every expression, every gesture, every moment of emotion would be scrutinized and analyzed by millions of people around the world. The pressure to maintain composure while grieving publicly was immense, but it was a pressure he had learned to manage throughout his life in the spotlight. He glanced at Catherine, who sat beside him with perfect posture and dignified calm, despite the tears that occasionally threatened to spill from her eyes. She had been such a source of strength for him throughout their marriage, understanding the unique pressures of royal life while bringing a sense of normalcy and groundedness to their relationship. Today, he was particularly grateful for her presence, for the steady warmth of her hand in his, and for the way she helped George understand what was happening around them. The ceremony progressed with clockwork precision, each element carefully planned and rehearsed. Military bands played, choirs sang, and world leaders listened with solemn respect. But, for William, the most powerful moments were the quiet ones, when the abbey fell silent except for the soft sounds of breathing and shifting, when the weight of loss hung heavy in the air, and when the reality of his grandmother's absence felt most acute. As the service neared its end, William prepared himself for what would come next: the procession through London, the journey to Windsor Castle, and the private burial that would mark the true end of this chapter in British history. He steeled himself for the emotional toll of the day ahead, knowing that his grief would have to be managed alongside his public duties. The final hymns began to play, and William felt a shift in the atmosphere around him. This was not just the end of a funeral service. It was the end of the Elizabethan age, the close of a remarkable chapter in British history, and the beginning of a new era that would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new responsibilities for him and his family. As he prepared to follow his grandmother's coffin out of Westminster Abbey, William carried with him the weight of her legacy, the burden of his future responsibilities, and the determination to honor her memory through his own service to the nation. The journey ahead would be difficult, but he would face it with the strength, dignity, and sense of duty that she had instilled in him throughout his life. The great doors of the abbey began to open, and sunlight streamed in, cutting through the solemnity of the moment with a reminder that life, despite all its sorrows, continued on. William stood, ready to take the next step in his journey as heir to the throne, carrying his grandmother's teachings with him into an uncertain but hopeful future. The procession from Westminster Abbey began with the measured cadence of military precision that had become synonymous with British royal ceremonies. As the Queen's coffin was carefully lifted and placed onto the gun carriage, William felt the full weight of the moment settling over him like a heavy cloak. The sound of drums beating a slow, solemn rhythm filled the air, accompanied by the clip-clop of horses' hooves on ancient London streets that had witnessed so many historic processions over the centuries. Walking behind his grandmother's coffin, William found himself falling into the familiar rhythm of royal protocol that had been drilled into him since childhood. His military training helped him maintain perfect posture and composure, even as his heart felt like it might break from the grief that threatened to overwhelm him. The streets were lined with hundreds of thousands of people, many of whom had waited for hours in the September chill just to catch a glimpse of this historic moment. King Charles walked directly ahead of William, bearing himself with the dignity and gravity that his new role demanded. The transformation in his father over the past 10 days had been remarkable to witness. Gone was any trace of the uncertainty or hesitation that had sometimes marked Charles's earlier years as heir apparent. In its place was a man who seemed to have fully embraced the enormous responsibility that had been thrust upon him, carrying himself with the quiet authority that comes from accepting one's destiny. Behind William walked his brother Harry, and despite the complicated emotions that surrounded their relationship, William felt a strange comfort in having him there. They had walked together behind their mother's coffin 25 years earlier, two young boys thrust into the public eye during their most vulnerable moment. Now they were grown men, fathers themselves, walking behind another beloved family member while the world watched and grieved alongside them. The crowds lining the streets were a sea of faces, many streaked with tears, all bearing expressions of profound respect and sadness. William had attended many public events throughout his life, but he had never experienced anything quite like this. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the ceremonial sounds of the procession and the occasional sob from someone in the crowd. It was as if the entire city, the entire nation, had collectively held its breath to honor their queen's final journey. As they walked, William's mind wandered to conversations he'd had with his grandmother about this very day. She had spoken of her funeral with the same practical, matter-of-fact approach she brought to all aspects of her life. "When my time comes," she had told him several years earlier, "I want it to be a celebration of service, not just a mourning of loss. I want people to remember what we accomplished together, not just what is ending." Her words echoed in his mind now as he observed the profound respect and love being shown by the crowds. This was indeed more than just a farewell. It was a recognition of 7 decades of unwavering service, a tribute to a life lived entirely in dedication to others. His grandmother would have been proud of the turnout, though she would have been characteristically humble about being the center of such attention. The procession route took them through some of London's most iconic locations, past Parliament, down Whitehall, through Horse Guards Parade, and along the Mall toward Buckingham Palace. Each location held its own significance in the story of his grandmother's reign, and William found himself remembering specific occasions when they had traveled these same routes together for happier celebrations. He thought about the Golden Jubilee celebrations in 2002, when these same streets had been filled with people celebrating his grandmother's 50 years on the throne. The contrast between that joyful occasion and today's solemn procession was stark, yet there was something beautiful about how the same spaces that had hosted celebrations of her life were now hosting her final farewell. As they passed Buckingham Palace, William couldn't help but glance toward the building that had been such a central part of his life. The palace stood silent and draped in black, its windows reflecting the gray September sky. He thought about all the family gatherings that had taken place within those walls, all the Christmas celebrations, birthday parties, and quiet family dinners that had shaped his childhood and continued to bring the family together throughout his adult life. It was during these reflections that something unexpected caught his attention. As he glanced toward the family members walking alongside and behind him, he noticed Camilla, his stepmother, and was startled to see what appeared to be a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. At first, he thought he must be imagining it. Surely no one would be smiling during such a solemn occasion. But, as he observed her more carefully over the next few minutes, he became certain that he wasn't mistaken. The observation troubled him deeply. Camilla's expression wasn't one of open joy or inappropriate levity, but there was definitely something there. A subtle upturn of her lips, a softness around her eyes that seemed out of place during such a grave moment. William found himself trying to understand what could possibly be causing such a reaction. Was she thinking of something amusing? Was she perhaps relieved that the long, stressful days of mourning were finally coming to an end? Or was there something else entirely behind that expression? William had always had a complex relationship with Camilla. In the years following his mother's death, he had struggled to accept his father's relationship with her, understanding intellectually that his father deserved happiness, but finding it emotionally difficult to embrace the woman who had been such a controversial figure during his parents' troubled marriage. Over time, however, he had come to respect Camilla for her dedication to his father and her willingness to take on the challenging role of royal consort despite years of negative publicity. In recent years, their relationship had grown warmer. Camilla had proven herself to be a stabilizing influence on King Charles, and she had embraced her royal duties with grace and commitment. She had been particularly supportive during the difficult periods when Harry's relationship with the family had become strained, often serving as a voice of reason and perspective during family discussions. But now, observing her during what should have been one of the most solemn moments of her life as a member of the royal family, William found himself questioning whether he truly understood her motivations and feelings. The smile, if that's what it was, seemed so incongruous with the gravity of the moment that he couldn't help but wonder what she might be thinking. Was it possible that she was experiencing some form of relief? The Queen's death had, after all, elevated Charles to the throne and made Camilla the Queen consort, a position she had never expected to hold when she first became involved with Charles decades earlier. Perhaps the smile reflected her satisfaction at finally achieving full acceptance and recognition within the royal family and British society. Or maybe, William considered, she was thinking about private moments she had shared with his grandmother. Despite the complicated history between them, the Queen had eventually accepted Camilla into the family and had even expressed her desire for Camilla to be known as Queen Consort when Charles became king. Perhaps Camilla was remembering some private conversation or moment of acceptance that held special meaning for her. The more William thought about it, the more he realized how little he actually knew about the relationship between his grandmother and stepmother. The Queen had been famously private about her personal feelings, and she had conducted herself with characteristic discretion regarding the entire situation with Charles and Camilla over the years. While she had clearly come to accept and support the relationship, she had never spoken openly about her personal feelings regarding the woman who had played such a controversial role in her son's life. As the procession continued toward Windsor Castle, William found himself stealing glances at Camilla whenever he could do so without drawing attention. The expression he had noticed seemed to come and go. Sometimes she appeared appropriately solemn and grief-stricken, but then that subtle smile would return, lasting just long enough for him to notice before disappearing again. The journey to Windsor was long, giving William plenty of time to observe and reflect. The crowds along the route remained respectful and silent, many throwing flowers toward the hearse as it passed. The sight of so many people paying their respects was deeply moving, and William felt grateful that his grandmother was receiving such a magnificent send-off from the people she had served for so long. But his attention kept returning to Camilla's unusual demeanor. He began to wonder if other family members had noticed what he was seeing. His father seemed completely focused on the solemnity of the occasion, his face set in an expression of dignified grief that never wavered. Harry appeared lost in his own thoughts, perhaps remembering their mother's funeral or grappling with his complicated feelings about returning to the family fold for this occasion. The other family members, Princess and Prince Edward, and the various cousins and extended family who were participating in the procession, all seemed appropriately somber and focused on the ceremonial aspects of the day. Only Camilla seemed to be experiencing some internal emotional state that differed from the collective mourning surrounding them. As they approached Windsor Castle, William's mind turned to what would happen next. The public portion of the day was nearly over, but the most emotionally challenging part still lay ahead. The private family burial that would mark the Queen's final rest beside her beloved husband, Prince Philip, who had died the year before. This intimate ceremony would be limited to close family members, away from the cameras and public scrutiny that had defined the earlier portions of the day. William anticipated that the private ceremony might be even more difficult than the public funeral. Without the structure and formality of the state occasion, without the need to maintain composure for the cameras and crowds, the family would be free to express their grief more openly. He expected tears, embraces, and the kind of raw emotion that had been carefully controlled throughout the public ceremonies. But, as he thought about the private ceremony to come, William found himself particularly curious about how Camilla would behave when the cameras were gone and the family was truly alone with their grief. Would she maintain the same demeanor he had observed during the procession, or would she reveal different emotions once the public portion of the day was complete? The sight of Windsor Castle looming ahead brought William back to the immediate present. The ancient fortress had been his grandmother's favorite residence, the place where she had felt most at home and most herself. It seemed fitting that her final journey would end there, in the place where she had spent her happiest private moments away from the formal demands of royal life. As the procession entered the castle grounds, William felt a shift in the atmosphere. They were moving from the public sphere into the private realm of family grief, from ceremony into genuine mourning. Soon, he would have the opportunity to observe his family members more closely, to better understand the various emotions and reactions that this momentous day had provoked. The hearse came to a stop near St. George's Chapel, where the final service would take place before the private burial. As the family gathered around the vehicle, William positioned himself where he could continue to observe Camilla while participating in the solemn rituals that would close this chapter of their lives forever. The afternoon sun had broken through the gray clouds, casting long shadows across the castle grounds and illuminating the ancient stones that had witnessed centuries of royal history. In a few hours, his grandmother would be laid to rest, and the Elizabethan age would officially come to an end. But, for William, the mystery of Camilla's behavior during this most sacred of moments had become something he was determined to understand, sensing that it might reveal important truths about his family that he had never fully grasped before. The interior of St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle had been transformed for the final service of Queen Elizabeth II's funeral day. Unlike the grand spectacle of Westminster Abbey, this ceremony was designed to be more intimate, attended only by close family members and a select few others who had played significant roles in the Queen's personal life. The ancient chapel, with its soaring Gothic arches and magnificent stained glass windows, provided a fitting backdrop for this final farewell to Britain's longest reigning monarch. As the family filed into their designated seats, William continued his discreet observation of Camilla. Now that they were in the more private setting of the chapel, away from the massive crowds and television cameras that had documented every moment of the earlier proceedings, he hoped to gain better insight into what was behind the expression he had noticed during the procession. The chapel held deep significance for the royal family. It was here that his grandparents had renewed their wedding vows on their golden anniversary, here that Charles and Camilla had held their blessing ceremony in 2005, and here that numerous family christenings, weddings, and memorial services had taken place over the years. For William, every corner of the chapel was filled with memories of family gatherings, both joyful and sorrowful. As they settled into their seats for the service, William found himself positioned where he could observe not only Camilla but also the interactions between various family members. The dynamics within the royal family had always been complex, shaped by centuries of protocol, personal relationships, and the unique pressures of public life. Today, all of those complexities were heightened by grief and the weight of transition that the Queen's death had brought upon them. King Charles sat in the front row, his bearing still dignified but perhaps slightly more relaxed now that they were away from the public eye. Beside him, Camilla had taken her place as the new queen consort, a title that still felt strange and new after years of being known as the Duchess of Cornwall. William watched as she adjusted her black veil and settled her hands in her lap, and once again, he caught that subtle expression that had puzzled him throughout the day. The Dean of Windsor began the service with a prayer, his voice echoing softly through the ancient chapel. The acoustics of St. George's Chapel were different from those of Westminster Abbey, more intimate, more personal, creating an atmosphere that encouraged reflection rather than pageantry. William found himself able to focus more deeply on his own emotions and memories now that the public portion of the day was behind them. But even as he tried to lose himself in memories of his grandmother, his attention kept returning to Camilla's demeanor. During the opening prayers, he noticed her glancing around the chapel with what seemed like satisfaction or contentment. When they stood for the first hymn, her voice joined the others in singing, but there was something in her posture and expression that suggested she was experiencing emotions beyond simple grief or reverence. William began to consider the possibility that what he was observing wasn't inappropriate at all, but rather reflected Camilla's complex relationship with this moment in royal history. For her, the Queen's death represented not just the loss of a family member, but also a fundamental shift in her own position and status. After years of being seen as an outsider, someone who had to earn acceptance within the royal family and British society, she was now the Queen consort, fully embraced and recognized in her role. Perhaps, William thought, what he was seeing was a form of quiet satisfaction at having finally achieved complete acceptance and recognition. Camilla had endured decades of criticism, scrutiny, and public disapproval. She had been blamed for the breakdown of Charles and Diana's marriage, vilified in the press, and faced with hostility from many members of the British public. The journey from being Charles's mistress to becoming his wife and now queen consort had been long, difficult, and often painful. The Queen's death, while tragic, had also marked the end of Camilla's long period of uncertainty and partial acceptance. She was now, unquestionably and permanently, a central figure in the British monarchy. The subtle expression William had been observing might simply reflect her relief and gratitude at having finally reached this point in her remarkable journey. As the service continued, William's mind wandered to conversations he had overheard between his father and grandmother over the years. In the early days of Charles and Camilla's relationship after Diana's death, he remembered tensions and careful negotiations about how Camilla would be integrated into royal life. The Queen had been cautious, concerned about public opinion and the potential impact on the monarchy's reputation. But, over time, William had witnessed his grandmother's attitude toward Camilla evolve. He remembered the moment in 2005 when the Queen had attended the blessing ceremony for Charles and Camilla's marriage, a public gesture of acceptance that had surprised many observers. He recalled subsequent family gatherings where his grandmother had shown genuine warmth toward Camilla, appreciating her stabilizing influence on Charles and her commitment to royal duties. Most significantly, William remembered the Queen's statement earlier in 2022, during her Platinum Jubilee year, when she had explicitly expressed her wish for Camilla to be known as Queen Consort when Charles became king. That statement had been seen as the final seal of approval, the Queen's ultimate endorsement of the woman who had become such an important part of her son's life. Perhaps what William was observing in Camilla's demeanor was her remembrance of that journey from outsider to insider, from controversial figure to accepted family member. The Queen's funeral represented the culmination of that transformation, and it was possible that Camilla was experiencing a complex mix of grief for the woman who had finally accepted her, and satisfaction at the recognition that acceptance had brought. The service reached its most solemn moment as the committal prayer was read. The Queen's coffin, draped in the royal standard and adorned with the crown she had worn for 70 years, sat before them as a stark reminder of the end of an era. William felt tears threatening to spill from his eyes as he thought about all the conversations he would never have with his grandmother, all the advice he would never receive, and all the moments of quiet companionship they would never share. But even in this moment of deepest emotion, he found his gaze drawn once again to Camilla. She was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, showing appropriate grief, but there was still something in her overall demeanor that suggested she was experiencing this moment differently than the rest of them. It wasn't that she appeared unfeeling or inappropriate. Rather, she seemed to be processing the day's events through a different emotional lens than her grieving family members. As the final prayers were said and the service drew to a close, William prepared himself for what would be the most difficult part of the entire day, the private burial in the King George VI Memorial Chapel, where his grandmother would be laid to rest beside Prince Philip. This small chapel, tucked away within St. George's Chapel, would host only the immediate family for the final, most intimate farewell. The transition from the main chapel to the memorial chapel was brief, but significant. As they walked the short distance, William noticed how the family members instinctively drew closer together, forming a tight circle around the coffin for these final moments. The weight of history seemed to press down upon them all. This was the end of the Elizabethan age, the close of a chapter that had defined British life for 7 decades. In the memorial chapel, with its more modest proportions and intimate atmosphere, the family gathered for the final prayers and the lowering of the Queen's coffin into the royal vault. William stood between Catherine and his father, feeling the support of his wife's presence, while also sensing the burden of responsibility that would soon be fully his to bear. It was in this most private and sacred moment that William observed something that would stay with him long after the day was over. As the final prayers were being said and the Queen's coffin was slowly lowered into its resting place, he caught Camilla's eye across the small chapel. For just a moment, their gazes met, and in that instant, William saw something in her expression that clarified everything he had been observing throughout the day. It wasn't satisfaction or inappropriate joy that he had been seeing in Camilla's demeanor. It was gratitude. Deep, profound gratitude for the acceptance she had received, for the journey she had traveled, and for the recognition of her place within the family that the Queen's death had finally and fully confirmed. In that brief moment of eye contact, William understood that Camilla's subtle smiles and expressions of contentment had been her way of honoring the Queen's memory and acknowledging the gift of acceptance that Elizabeth II had given her. The realization brought a new understanding to William's perception of his stepmother. He began to see that her behavior throughout the day hadn't been inappropriate or puzzling at all. It had been her own unique way of processing grief, while also acknowledging the profound impact the Queen had had on her life. Camilla was mourning not just a family member, but the woman who had made her transformation from outsider to Queen consort possible. As the burial ceremony concluded and the family began to disperse, William felt a complex mix of emotions. His grief for his grandmother remained as sharp as ever, but it was now accompanied by a new appreciation for the complexities of family relationships and the different ways people process significant life changes. The mystery of Camilla's behavior had been solved, but it had also opened his eyes to aspects of royal family dynamics that he had never fully understood before. The long day was finally coming to an end, but William knew that the observations he had made and the insights he had gained would continue to influence his understanding of his family and his role within it for years to come. As they walked back through the ancient corridors of Windsor Castle, he found himself seeing both his stepmother and his family's history in a new and more nuanced light. The reception following Queen Elizabeth II's funeral took place in the state apartments of Windsor Castle, where family members and close friends gathered to share memories and find comfort in each other's company after the emotionally draining day. The atmosphere was subdued but warm, with the formal protocols of the earlier ceremonies giving way to more natural family interactions. William found himself moving through the rooms, accepting condolences from distant relatives and family friends, all while continuing to process the insights he had gained about Camilla during the burial service. The castle's ancient walls seemed to hold the weight of the day's emotions, absorbing the grief, love, and complex feelings that filled every corner of the grand rooms. Portraits of previous monarchs looked down from their gilded frames, creating a sense of continuity that stretched back through centuries of British royal history. William felt the presence of all those who had come before, understanding that he was now part of a chain of succession that would continue long after his own time had passed. As he moved through the reception, William noticed how different family members were coping with the day's events. Some clustered together in small groups, sharing quiet conversations and memories of the Queen. Others stood alone, lost in their own thoughts and reflections. The varying responses to grief fascinated him, particularly as he continued to observe Camilla's behavior in this more relaxed setting. Now that they were away from both the public eye and the formal structure of the funeral services, Camilla seemed more animated and engaged than she had appeared during the day's earlier events. She moved gracefully through the room, speaking with various family members and guests, her manner warm and comforting. William watched as she embraced Princess and with genuine affection, as she spoke quietly with Prince Edward about shared memories of the Queen, and as she offered comfort to some of the Queen's longtime staff members who had been included in the private gathering. What struck William most was how naturally Camilla had stepped into the role of family matriarch. As the new Queen consort, she was now the senior female member of the royal family, and she seemed to be embracing that responsibility with grace and confidence. Her interactions with family members showed a side of her that William hadn't fully appreciated before. She was serving as a source of stability and comfort for others, helping to hold the family together during this time of transition and grief. Catherine approached William with 2 cups of tea, a small gesture that grounded him in the familiar comfort of his marriage. "You've been quiet since we got back from the chapel," she observed, her voice soft and understanding. "Are you doing all right?" William accepted the tea gratefully, using the moment to gather his thoughts. "I've been watching Camilla," he admitted, keeping his voice low. "There's something about her behavior today that's made me think about our family differently." Catherine followed his gaze across the room to where Camilla was speaking with a group that included Harry and Meghan. Even from a distance, it was clear that she was being gracious and welcoming, helping to bridge some of the awkwardness that had surrounded Harry's return to family events in recent years. "She's been through so much to get to this point," Catherine said thoughtfully. "Today must feel like a validation of everything she's endured over the past few decades. She's finally, where she always belonged, fully accepted and recognized." William nodded, appreciating his wife's insight. Catherine had always possessed an acute understanding of family dynamics, perhaps because she had entered the royal family as an outsider herself, though under very different circumstances than Camilla. Her perspective helped William see that what he had observed throughout the day wasn't inappropriate joy, but rather a complex emotional response to achieving something that had seemed impossible for many years. As the evening progressed, William found opportunities to observe Camilla in various interactions. He watched her speak with his children. George, Charlotte, and Louis had joined the family gathering after their day with their nanny. Camilla's demeanor with the children was warm and grandmotherly, and William was struck by how naturally they responded to her presence. She had clearly invested time and effort into building relationships with her step-grandchildren, and the genuine affection between them was evident. The sight of Camilla reading a story to Charlotte and Louis in a quiet corner of one of the smaller drawing rooms brought an unexpected emotion to William's chest. His grandmother had often done the same thing during family gatherings, settling into a comfortable chair with whichever grandchildren or great-grandchildren wanted to hear a tale. Seeing Camilla step naturally into this role felt like a continuation of family tradition rather than a replacement of it. King Charles appeared at William's side, looking exhausted but relieved that the most difficult part of the day was behind them. "Your grandmother would have been pleased with how today went," Charles said quietly, his eyes surveying the family gathering with satisfaction. "She always wanted our family to remain close, to support each other through difficult times." "Father," William said, seizing the opportunity to address something that had been on his mind all day, "I've been observing Camilla throughout the services, and I think I understand better now what this day has meant for her." Charles turned to look at his son with interest. "What do you mean?" "I initially thought her demeanor was strange," Almost inappropriate for such a solemn occasion, William explained carefully. But I realize now that what I was seeing was her gratitude for the acceptance and recognition that grandmother gave her. This isn't just a funeral for her. It's also the culmination of her long journey to full acceptance within our family. Charles's expression softened with understanding and appreciation. That's very perceptive of you, William. Camilla has indeed endured more than most people could handle over the years. Your grandmother's eventual acceptance of her meant everything to both of us. Today, in a sense, represents the final seal of approval from the woman whose opinion mattered most. The conversation was interrupted by the approach of Princess and who had been circulating through the room offering comfort and support to various family members and guests, and had always been known for her straightforward manner and her ability to cut through emotional complexity with practical wisdom. The two of you look like you're having a serious conversation, and observed, joining them near the window that looked out over the castle grounds. I hope you're not dwelling too much on the difficult aspects of today. Mother would have wanted us to focus on celebration rather than just sorrow. We were actually discussing how well Camilla has handled everything, Charles explained. William has gained some new insights into her perspective on today's events, and nodded approvingly. She's been remarkable, hasn't she? I'll admit, I had my reservations about her for many years. But, watching her today, seeing how she's supported you and helped hold our family together, I have nothing but respect for her. Mother made the right choice in accepting her fully into the family. The endorsement from, and who had always been protective of family traditions and skeptical of outsiders, carried particular weight. William realized that his own evolving understanding of Camilla was part of a broader family recognition of her contributions and her rightful place within the royal household. As the evening continued, William found himself in conversation with Harry, their first substantial interaction since his brother's arrival from California. The conversation was careful and somewhat stilted at first, both brothers navigating the complex emotions surrounding their relationship while also dealing with their shared grief over their grandmother's death. "How are you holding up?" William asked, genuinely concerned about his brother's emotional state. Despite their differences, he could see that Harry was struggling with being back in the family fold, even temporarily, while also processing his own grief. "It's been difficult," Harry admitted. "Being back here, surrounded by all these memories and all this history, it brings up a lot of complicated feelings. But Camilla has been surprisingly supportive. She's gone out of her way to make Megan and me feel welcome, which I didn't really expect." William was struck by Harry's comment about Camilla's supportive behavior. It aligned with his own observations throughout the day and added another layer to his understanding of her role within the family. She wasn't just accepting her new position as queen consort. She was actively working to heal family rifts and bring people together. "She's changed a lot over the years," William offered carefully. "I think she's grown into the role gradually, and now that she's fully accepted, she's able to focus on being a positive force for family unity." Harry nodded thoughtfully. "It's strange, isn't it? When we were younger, she was this controversial figure who we weren't sure how to relate to. Now she feels like the stabilizing presence that's helping hold everything together during a really difficult transition." The brothers continued their conversation for several more minutes, touching on memories of their grandmother, their concerns about the future of the monarchy, and their hopes for eventually repairing their own relationship. Throughout their discussion, William found his gaze occasionally drifting to Camilla, who was moving through the room with quiet confidence, offering comfort where it was needed, and helping to facilitate connections between family members who hadn't seen each other in months or years. As the reception began to wind down and family members started to take their leave, William reflected on how much his understanding of Camilla had evolved throughout this single, extraordinary day. What had begun as confusion about her demeanor during the funeral services had transformed into a deeper appreciation for her complex position within the family and her skillful navigation of an incredibly challenging situation. The woman he had once viewed with skepticism and occasional resentment had revealed herself to be someone who genuinely cared about family unity and was willing to put significant effort into building bridges and healing wounds. Her subtle expressions of satisfaction throughout the day weren't signs of inappropriate joy, but rather reflections of genuine gratitude for the acceptance she had received and her determination to honor that acceptance through service to the family. As William prepared to leave Windsor Castle and return to his own home with Catherine and the children, he carried with him a new understanding of family dynamics and a deeper appreciation for the complexities of human relationships. The day of his grandmother's funeral had been one of the most difficult of his life, but it had also provided unexpected insights into the people closest to him and the bonds that would help carry the royal family into its uncertain but hopeful future. The days following Queen Elizabeth II's funeral brought a strange quiet to the royal residences, as if the entire monarchy was catching its breath after the intensity of the mourning period and the massive ceremonial farewell. For William, these quiet days provided an opportunity to process not just his grief over his grandmother's death, but also the profound insights he had gained about his family during those emotionally charged hours at Westminster Abbey and Windsor Castle. Life began to settle into new rhythms as King Charles III stepped fully into his role as monarch. The transition, while carefully planned for decades, still brought numerous adjustments and challenges as the family adapted to their new positions and responsibilities. William found himself taking on additional duties as the heir apparent, while Catherine gracefully embraced her expanded role as the Princess of Wales, a title that carried both honor and the weight of public expectation. But it was Camilla's transformation that continued to fascinate William most. In the weeks following the funeral, he watched as she grew into her role as queen consort with remarkable confidence and grace. The subtle expressions of satisfaction he had observed during the funeral services now made perfect sense as he witnessed her embracing her new responsibilities with enthusiasm and skill. The first major test came during a state visit from the President of France, which took place just 3 weeks after the Queen's funeral. William observed Camilla closely as she hosted official dinners, participated in ceremonial events, and engaged with foreign dignitaries. Her performance was flawless, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of royal protocol combined with genuine warmth and diplomatic skill. What impressed William most was how Camilla had managed to create her own distinct style as queen consort while still honoring the traditions and expectations associated with her role. She wasn't trying to replicate Queen Elizabeth II's approach, something that would have been impossible and inappropriate, but was instead developing a unique way of serving that reflected her own personality and strengths. During a private family dinner at Clarence House, William found an opportunity to speak more directly with Camilla about the observations he had made during the funeral. The conversation took place in the comfortable sitting room where the family often gathered for informal meals, surrounded by the personal touches and photographs that made the space feel like a true family home rather than a formal royal residence. "I owe you an apology," William said as they settled into chairs with their after-dinner coffee. "During grandmother's funeral, I was confused by some of your reactions, and I'm afraid I initially misinterpreted what I was seeing." Camilla looked surprised but encouraged him to continue. "What do you mean? I thought we all handled that difficult day as well as could be expected." "You did handle it well," William assured her. "That's exactly my point. What I was seeing in your expressions throughout the day wasn't inappropriate joy or satisfaction in the way I first thought. It was gratitude, wasn't it? Gratitude for the acceptance grandmother had given you and recognition of how far you traveled to reach that point." Camilla's eyes filled with tears as she nodded slowly. "Your grandmother's acceptance meant everything to me," she said softly. "Not just because of what it represented for my relationship with your father, but because she was such an extraordinary woman. Earning her respect and approval was one of the most important achievements of my life." Charles, who had been quietly listening to the conversation, reached over to take his wife's hand. "Your grandmother struggled with the situation for many years," he said to William. "She was concerned about public opinion, worried about the impact on the monarchy, and protective of the family's reputation. But, over time, she came to see how much Camilla meant to me and how much she contributed to our family's stability and happiness. The moment she asked for me to be known as queen consort," Camilla continued, "was one of the most emotional moments of my life. It represented complete acceptance, not just tolerance or resignation, but genuine recognition of my place within the family. So yes, during the funeral, I was grieving deeply for a woman I had come to love and respect enormously, but I was also feeling profound gratitude for the gift she had given me." William felt a wave of understanding and appreciation wash over him. "I can see now why that would create such complex emotions. You were mourning her loss while also celebrating the culmination of your journey to full acceptance." "Exactly," Camilla said, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "It felt almost inappropriate to feel grateful during such a sad time, but I couldn't help acknowledging what she had done for me." she didn't have to accept me. She could have maintained a polite but distant relationship. Instead, she chose to embrace me fully, and that choice changed everything for your father and me. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Camilla sharing stories about her evolving relationship with the Queen that William had never heard before. She spoke about tentative early interactions, gradually warming conversations, and eventually genuine friendship that had developed between the two women. The picture that emerged was of two strong, intelligent women who had found common ground in their love for Charles and their commitment to the monarchy's well-being. One story particularly struck William. Camilla described a conversation she had with the Queen just a few months before her death, during which Elizabeth II had explicitly thanked her for the positive changes she had brought to Charles's life and expressed confidence in Camilla's ability to support him as king. She told me that she had initially worried about how the public would accept me, Camilla recounted, but that she had come to realize that authenticity and genuine service were more important than a spotless past. She said she was proud of how I had grown into the role and that she trusted me to help guide the monarchy into its next chapter. These revelations helped William understand not just Camilla's behavior during the funeral, but also the broader dynamics that had been at play within his family for years. The Queen's acceptance of Camilla hadn't been grudging or merely practical. It had been genuine and heartfelt, based on years of observation and growing respect. In the months that followed this conversation, William found his relationship with Camilla deepening in ways he hadn't expected. He began to seek her advice on various matters, appreciating her outsider's perspective on royal life, combined with her years of experience navigating its complexities. She had insights into public perception, media relations, and family dynamics that proved invaluable as William prepared for his own eventual role as king. Camilla also proved to be an unexpected bridge between William and Harry during Harry's subsequent visits to the UK. Her ability to remain neutral while encouraging reconciliation made her a valuable ally in William's efforts to repair his relationship with his brother. She understood the pain of family division and the importance of healing old wounds, bringing wisdom gained from her own difficult journey to acceptance within the family. One particular incident illustrated Camilla's growing importance to William. During a challenging period when negative press coverage was affecting his family's morale, Camilla offered counsel that combined practical media strategy with emotional support. Her advice helped William navigate the situation while maintaining his dignity and protecting his children from unnecessary scrutiny. You have to remember that the press attention, both positive and negative, is temporary, she told him during a private conversation in the gardens at Highgrove. What matters is staying true to your values and maintaining your focus on service. The public ultimately responds to authenticity and genuine commitment to helping others. These words echoed advice that Queen Elizabeth II might have given, but they carried additional weight coming from someone who had endured decades of negative press coverage and emerged stronger and more respected. William realized that Camilla's experience as a controversial figure who had eventually won public acceptance made her uniquely qualified to offer guidance on handling criticism and maintaining personal integrity under intense scrutiny. As the first anniversary of Queen Elizabeth II's death approached, William reflected on how much his understanding of his family had evolved since that September day when he had first noticed Camilla's subtle expressions during the funeral services. What had begun as confusion and mild concern had transformed into deep respect and appreciation for a woman who had demonstrated remarkable resilience, grace, and commitment to family unity. The mystery of Camilla's smile at the funeral had been solved, but, more importantly, it had opened William's eyes to the complex human emotions and relationships that existed beneath the formal protocols and public facades of royal life. He had learned that acceptance and redemption were possible even in the most challenging circumstances, and that genuine love and service could overcome years of controversy and misunderstanding. Looking toward the future, William felt confident that his family was well prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The solid foundation of mutual respect and support that had been built over years of shared experiences would serve them well as they continued to adapt and evolve in their roles as public servants and family members. The Queen's legacy lived on not just in the institutions and traditions she had protected, but in the relationships and bonds she had helped forge within the family she loved so deeply. The smile that had puzzled William during those solemn hours at his grandmother's funeral had ultimately taught him one of the most important lessons of his life: that human emotions are complex, that redemption is possible, and that sometimes the most profound expressions of love and gratitude can appear in the most unexpected moments. As he prepared to carry forward his grandmother's legacy of service and dedication, he carried with him a deeper understanding of the people who would help him bear that responsibility, and a greater appreciation for the power of acceptance, forgiveness, and unconditional love.